Hello, thank you for joining me for this new kind of video. This time I wanted to try something a little bit different. Not my usual NDE videos with a lot of editing, with a lot of music and illustrations and so on. I will still make these kind of videos, but I wanted to try a new kind of podcast where I will be asking questions myself. So my first guest is Aaron Abke. Thank you for joining me for my very first podcast. And can you present yourself, your background? How did you grow up? And did you have any spiritual or religious background, basically?
I grew up in evangelical Christianity as a third generation pastor's son and very much wanted to follow in my father and grandfather's footsteps. And so I went to ministry school at ORU in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I got my bachelor's degree, double bachelor's in music and theology. And off I went in my full time pastoral career by 23 as a worship pastor in San Jose. And had a very rude spiritual awakening out of my religion about 6 months after that, and was kind of forced into a corner to accept that I no longer believed in the version of God that I was brought up to believe in, the Christian God. And so that was a difficult transition to make, having just gotten hired as a full-time pastor and realizing I'm no longer a Christian. So I had to pretty much deconstruct my whole life and start from scratch at that point. I had been married at 23 years old to my Christian, ex-wife, and that ended up obviously not working out. So it was a quite a dark night of the soul to go through to transition out of religion and sort of explore a new territory of who is God to me? What do I believe about the divine? And I had to start from scratch in that regard. And so I began really looking into the Eastern traditions, especially Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism, and began to understand God from a very more non-dualistic lens. And that eventually led me back full circle to the teachings of Jesus, and realizing that Jesus, who I had grown up worshiping and believing was God, was actually an enlightened spiritual master who was teaching all the same core principles that all the Eastern philosophies teach, and actually may have had some influence in Eastern philosophy himself. And so that's where my real spiritual awakening began after that, around 28 years old. I had a really profound, sort of life-changing spiritual awakening when I was working at Google, funny enough. And that was my sort of experience of ego death for the first time, of experiencing what is beyond the thinking mind and the self-identity I was holding on to. And so from there, I began pursuing a spiritual path of how do I sort of get back to that state of consciousness again? Because I was actually in that state of Buddha consciousness, if you'd like to call it that, for a full 2 week period, a 14-day period, until eventually it wore off and the ego came back online. And I had to figure out, what do I do to get back to that heavenly state of consciousness again? What do I need to identify and release and let go of to be able to experience that freedom once again? Somewhere along that journey of seeking, there was a couple texts that the universe brought into my field. The first being the Law of One, and the second being A Course in Miracles, which I have right here. It's never too far away from me. This book was really pivotal, and maybe the most pivotal in my journey, because if you've read the course, you know that it sort of uses the gospel language to package its non-duality teachings. And it takes a little bit of learning the language to get past the language barrier. But suffice to say, all the terms I grew up with, atonement, the Holy Spirit, Christ, God, the Son of God, all these terms were redefined by A Course in Miracles, and allowed me to actually hang on to a lot of the tradition I grew up with and re-envision it in a much more expanded sense. And so, yeah, I just kind of sunk my teeth into this text, and I felt like it was my lifeline in many ways of, if anything is going to help me get back to that non-dual state of consciousness that I got to enjoy for those 2 weeks, it's got to be this text, because the course begins by saying, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, and herein lies the peace of God. And as soon as I read that, man, I went, oh, this book has the codes for me, because that's exactly what I experienced for those 2 weeks. It was just this very sort of ordinary, very obvious, and very childlike realization that, yeah, nothing unreal exists. Therefore, there's nothing to fear in God's universe, and only love is real. And just knowing that creates a foundation of peace in your state of being that can't be shaken by the illusions of the world and the mind anymore. And I knew that that book was holding the keys to help me get back to that kingdom of heaven once again.
Yes. But then people could ask, how do you embody all these teachings? Especially right now, it feels like a lot of people feel like either depressed or they lack a meaning or they feel something is wrong with this world. And it's like, why am I even here? You know, the big questions, who am I? Why am I here? And so in your own life, how did you manage to embody these teachings basically?
It's a great question because I don't know if I know the answer technically to that question other than just that it was clear to me that these teachings won't do me any real good if I don't strive to embody them. Because the main kind of teaching of the course, I mean, there's a number of main teachings, but the primary kind of idea the course sets forward is you are the Christ. You're already the Christ. So you're not becoming something that you're not. And the ego doesn't really exist. So you're not really getting rid of something, but you are under the mistaken belief that you are the ego and not the Christ. And so it's like you've fallen asleep in a dream at night. And, this is the interesting thing, right? Is that when you're dreaming at night, the part of you that wakes up from the dream is not the dream character. And so I began to realize this interesting paradox of the awakening journey is that the part of me that's seeking to awaken is not the part of me that actually wakes up. The part of me that wakes up is the Christ. It's as if the Christ, my true nature, has just fallen asleep and is having a dream of some sort. And so in the same way that if I have a dream about running away from dinosaurs or something, and I wake up in the morning, I don't go, phew, thank God I'm free from those dinosaurs, right? I'm not under the dream identity anymore. It's an immediate identity shift. And the only realization that happens upon awakening is, oh, none of that was real. Oh, it never happened. And so the course is like, that's the realization you need to have in your waking state.
But when you talk about the Christ consciousness, can you explain what it is? Because a lot of people could say, that sounds nice, but I'm not religious myself. So I respect that, but I don't want to go into religion and talk about Jesus Christ and everything. It's not for me, you know. What could you say to that?
Well, it's a great question because we're not talking about something religious when we use the term Christ. All of these words that the Course uses, the Christ, Holy Spirit, the Father, atonement, these are just like stand-in terms for metaphysical truths or non-dual truths. So the Christ is the term the Course uses for your true eternal essence. So it's the part of me that is one with God. And if I had to define what that is, which you can't really, right? But if we have to try to wrap primitive human language around it, we can say that the Christ is simply the I am nature or the I am principle through which you experience yourself. So every single one of us is constantly experiencing ourselves or knowing ourselves as the first person in the present tense. And this is inescapable. You can never experience yourself as the second person. Not even when you look into a mirror, right? You're still the subject looking at a reflection of yourself. And likewise, you cannot experience yourself outside of the present moment. You can't experience yourself in the past or the future. And so that's actually that sort of eternal conscious principle we call I am is what God is. Because there's only one I am, there's only one subject. And that is where we all share oneness together, is that we all know ourselves as the first person present tense, I am. And so that's the Christ. And we see Jesus in the Gospel of John, especially, speaking from that state very often. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the bread of life. I am the door. He's really speaking to this principle in all of us. And in John 17, he prays that we would all know the same oneness that he knows with God. So what's interesting is that the first Christians, who were called the Nazarenes, which Jesus was of the sect of the Nazarenes, right? But there was a whole sect of these Nazarene Jewish Christians, and the history is very clear on this. The first Christians believed that the Christ was something separate than the person Jesus, but that at the baptism under John the Baptist, the oldest gospel account is called the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, written in Hebrew. It has the dove actually entering the chest, into the chest of Jesus, and that represents the eternal Christ, the divine nature, entering Jesus, the human person, and sort of animating his body and becoming the Messiah. And so this was the original belief of the Christians as well, that the Christ is an eternal principle It's like a teleological idea of who we truly are, the divine idea of man, the perfect idea that God has in God's mind. We all actually are that, but we're undergoing a state of evolving into it, of becoming that. And that is the great revealing of the Christ in the universe. So everything's happening perfectly. There's no accidents. But nonetheless, the Course says it's like you're asleep in a dream and you forgot your true nature. And so you're trying to wake up from this dream that we call the ego.
Yes, and you wrote a book recently called The Three Beliefs of Ego. Could you quickly define what is the ego and how could we break free from it if we have to?
This is the most fascinating topic for me. I love studying the mind, the ego, the mechanisms of the ego. The ego is not an entity, but an activity. And specifically, the ego is the mental activity of identifying with form. So identifying yourself with some kind of form. And a form can be obviously the body. That's the first form the ego really identifies with. But a form can also be an idea: husband, father, wife, mother, sister, employee, you name it. The ego is this mental activity that's always going on of I am this, I am that. And what's really happening is that I am principle we talked about, which is what you truly are, and it's unchangeably what you are. Ego takes that knowing that I exist, I am, and it just projects it onto objects and says, I'm this, I am that, I'm this idea, I'm that idea. And it goes on collecting these identities. And every single one of these identities, which I call selves, runs a particular sequence of these three beliefs. And every identity, every self it creates always follows this exact sequence in some way, which is lack, attachment, and control. And the ego cannot do anything outside of this sequence. It's first born in the mind through the belief in lack. So going back to childhood, anytime that you have an experience that seems to imply to your mind that a need is lacking, that could be a lack of love, a lack of safety, a lack of purpose, you name it. The mind then creates a self, an identity, who can cope with that lack, who can live in the reality that is devoid of that need, right? And so the ego and its selves that it creates are problem solvers in that way. They're created by the mind to solve a problem, which is lack. And so the lack belief gives birth to the self and the sequence of that self. And so this is the important thing to understand is that the ego and every little mini ego it creates, every self, a self is what it does, right? Because it's not an entity. There's no ego in your skull. You can't find it. You can't draw a picture of it. You can't weigh it on a scale. It is an activity. It's a verb, not a noun. So lack gives birth to it. And then attachment sort of defines the goal of that self. Let's say that in childhood, you felt unsafe to express your emotions because your father said, stop crying. Big kids don't cry, Immediately your mind created a self, a new identity who could cope with that lack of safety. And we could call it something like the unsafe self. So this self is always now scanning your environment for threats to its emotional safety. So it's going to have different ways of protecting itself from feeling unsafe emotionally. So lack gives birth to that self. Attachment, I don't want to feel unsafe, right? That defines the goal of that self or program. And then control is the third belief or function, which is how it goes about avoiding that lack. So it's going to push people away before they get too close, right? Because it doesn't want to feel unsafe. It's going to avoid intimacy and different kind of coping mechanisms like this. But you can boil it all down to this sequence. And it's actually in identifying the sequence, all 3 points, the lack, the attachment, and control, is how you actually identify the ego or the self. And the identifying of it creates the distance. Now you can name it. Now you can understand how it functions. And then you can see it happening in real time. So when you get triggered and you notice yourself going back into those controlling behavior patterns, you can say, wait a minute, there's the unsafe self. I'm trying to protect myself from feeling emotionally threatened or whatever. So you can now have a space to respond to that program rather than just react and be swept away by it.
Yes, but then a lot of comments under my YouTube videos are like that. I didn't choose to be here. If everything is so nice on the other side, as you say, why am I here? I didn't choose to come. And the ego, I may be like what you describe, but It's not because of me, it's because of this world. I have to protect myself in this world. I have to earn money. I have to. So basically, my
Right.
question would be like, it's a big question, but what's the nature of this reality? Because you talked about the nature of who we are. Now we have to talk about the nature of where we are.
From what I understand, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but it seems clear to me, especially through studying like near-death experiences, which I know you've done a lot of work on, you get this one unequivocal message from NDEs, people that have experienced an NDE, from all the kind of Eastern philosophies, esoteric ancient texts. It all kind of comes back to this idea that we incarnate into the physical universe, our souls incarnate to experience evolution and growth, and that incarnating is the only way the soul actually grows and learns lessons. So the idea is if we're just in the, let's say, the heavenly plane or heaven, where everything's perfect, there's no problems, there's no suffering, then it actually, although it's wonderful, it can't catalyze any growth or learning in the soul. Or if it does, it's very, very minimal compared to what you can learn in a human lifetime. And so I think the challenging thing we all have to accept to go beyond this voice that cries victim and says, I don't want to be here. I didn't choose to come here. I don't like all these challenges, is we have to accept you're here in this body because your soul chose to come here, because there's certain lessons that your soul wants or needs to learn to go to its next phase of growth and evolution. And so accepting that allows you to begin learning those lessons. And really it's not life itself that's so challenging and painful. It's our resistance to life. It's our playing the victim and saying, "Oh, I don't want to be here. This is too hard." When we engage with life from that framework or mentality, we completely blind ourselves to all the lessons life is trying to teach us. But when we actually just accept, look, I must be here because I chose to be here. So while I'm here in this relatively short human lifetime, let me do the best I can to learn these lessons. When we have that attitude, all of a sudden life becomes like a classroom. And we find that everything we experience actually is teaching us profound spiritual lessons. And we're growing in wisdom. It's the ability to keep your heart open to every experience that actually transcends suffering. Because the working idea that I use is that all things exist in relationship in this universe. And that relationship is a framework we need to begin perceiving that everything happens through relationship. And you can't get out of this, right? You cannot escape the relationship you have to your own thoughts, your mind, your feelings, the people in front of you that you meet, the food you eat, the water you drink, the air you breathe. Everything you experience is being experienced through relationship. And here's the key is that you're actually choosing what kind of relationship you want to have with everything that you experience, but it's actually a program making that choice 99% of the time. It's the ego and all of its different lack attachment control mechanisms defining what kind of relationship it wants to have with things. And if you're not aware that that choice is being made on your behalf, then you can't step in and consciously make it yourself. And so we have to become aware of this and say, okay, if everything exists in relationship, then I want to learn and practice how to be in loving relationship with everything. And I talk about what loving relationship is and looks like, but suffice to say, I think that a much better sort of working definition of enlightenment, this buzzword we hear all the time, is that enlightenment is the ability to be in loving relationship with everything at all times. So the defining distinction there is that enlightenment is an ability, not just a state that you access. It's something that has to be cultivated and developed through discipline and practice. And being in a human lifetime and engaging with your life catalysts and challenges is the only way to develop that ability.
Yes, and what you said is very important. I think like when we hear everything is perfect, I think it doesn't mean everything is very nice and oh it's so nice. It means everything has a deep meaning, even if we don't or we cannot get it. So if reality is always meaningful like that, every little detail we experience is meaningful, does it mean that this reality is a we often hear about a simulation, a matrix, Maya. Is this reality just a simulation, basically a dream?
I think it all depends on what your definition of simulation is. But if you mean by simulation that it's not ultimately real, it's not the highest reality, then yeah, of course. our soul is what's real, and the physical body, the physical lifetime we're all experiencing is technically an illusion. Now, that's another confusing idea, right? What do we mean by that? Do we mean it's an illusion, so you're not experiencing it and stuff? No, that's not what an illusion means, right? Here's the definition of real versus unreal. There's three criteria that qualify to identify something as real, okay? The first one is that what is real is eternal. So it has no beginning and it has no ending. Second quality is that what is real is unchanging. So it doesn't undergo evolution and flux and change from moment to moment. And then the third criteria of what is real is that what is real is self-sufficient or self-shining, which means it's not depending on something else to exist. It's not borrowing its existence from something else. So if we flip that around, we also have the three criteria for an illusion. What we mean when we say something is an illusion in spiritual philosophy. So what is an illusion means it's not eternal. It has a beginning and will have an ending. It does undergo change, or it is subject to change, and it's not self-sufficient. It does depend on something outside of itself in order to exist. So for a physical example, we can look at a shadow, right? A shadow absolutely seems to exist. And if there's a shadow in the room we're in, we can all point to it and say, there's the shadow. So if someone says, well, that shadow's an illusion, we might feel gaslit for a moment and say, come on, are you saying I'm not looking at a shadow? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's not eternal, it undergoes change, and it's not self-sufficient. A shadow depends on three different things, right? There needs to be a light source, there needs to be an object to obscure the light, and a flat surface for the shadow to project on. And if you get rid of any one of those three things, you can't have a shadow. So although it seems to be there, we can all walk up to it and we can outline it with chalk and stuff. We can't actually grab it or touch it or make it tangible in any way. And that's what an illusion means. Our life is like that. It doesn't mean you're not experiencing this moment as a person. You are. It just means this life is not eternal and it undergoes change and it's not self-sufficient, right? To be in a human lifetime depends on the whole universe around you. Like you are, your body, your human nature is fully dependent on the universe around you. When we start to understand these principles, it actually speaks of so much wonder and beauty that everything is connected, everything is happening through relationship and unity. And that's what makes the illusion of a human lifetime like a beautiful dream that you're having. We all like having good dreams. And when we have a good dream, we don't want to wake up from them, right? It's the nightmare that we want to wake up from. And when does human life become a nightmare? When we mistake it for being real. When we think all I am is this body, that's all there is to me, that's what makes it painful and full of suffering. And so the Eastern traditions have long said, the body's an illusion, the world is an illusion. The Course in Miracles says the same thing. But again, it's important we understand what that means so that we can actually grasp the freedom that's available in that pointing. And I think the Buddha summarized this the best in one of the stories from the sutras. His disciples ask him sort of like, hey, Lord Buddha, this is your last lifetime, right? Like you're definitely not coming back here in your next lifetime, right? Kind of implying like, because this place sucks, And the Buddha responds, and he was perceiving the underlying question they were really asking. And he said, if you could see what I see, you would want to come back here for 1,000 more lifetimes. And I think that speaks to one who has transcended the illusion of the world. Jesus also famously said, fear not, for I have overcome the world. So be in the world, but not of the world. And he's speaking to this idea. I've overcome the illusion of the world in my mind. It's not real to me anymore. Only God is real. And then I interact with the world from that perspective. That's real freedom and transcendence.
Yeah, exactly. It means like the soul is more real than this 3D reality we experience. Who we really are is more real than what we experience. And we are one with the reality we experience. So it means that we can have some effect, some power on the reality we experience. It can explain the law of attraction, visualization. But I know it's a tricky subject because some people will start to say, oh no, it's just new age. It's not good to talk about the law of attraction. It's not highly spiritual. But I think it works because of what you just said, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's so not new age that I think the best law of attraction teacher who's ever lived is J Money himself. Jesus has all kinds of law of attraction bangers in the New Testament. Mark 11:24, for example. Anything you ask for in prayer, believe that you've already received it, and it shall be yours. Ask and it shall be given. Seek and you shall find. Luke 6:37. The measure you give is the measure you get back. He taught many parables of sowing and reaping, and the wicked servant and the good servant. In so many ways, Jesus unpacked this divine law that you attract what you put out. And so we can call that the law of attraction if we want, but I think like a better way to redefine it might be the law of congruence. The universe will bring to you not what you want or desire, but what you're congruent with. So if you're congruent with what you desire, then yes, you can definitely have what you desire. But for example, if I want to have a lot of money, but I have all these underlying lack beliefs and I feel like a victim and I'm jealous of wealthy people and stuff, I'm not congruent with abundance in that way. I'm not congruent with the reality I want. And so I don't have access to it. I can't attract it to myself. So Jesus really defined it well when he said the measure you give is the measure you get back. And this has to do with what I mentioned earlier, that all things exist in relationship. To me, that is the ultimate code of the universe is relationship, because now I understand through this lens, right, that the universe has given me free will. The creator has given us all free will. So although there's infinite trillions of different things we can go be in relationship to, the universe isn't going to force us to be in relationship to something. You've got to choose to be in relationship with it. And if you're in a loving relationship with something, you attract it to yourself. If you're in a negative or resistant relationship, you repel it from yourself. And all of that is going on in your mind, in your subconscious, what you believe, what you fundamentally believe is real about yourself and reality. So we're not actually aware of what we're congruent with most of the time, unless we do that deep inner spiritual work to find out where we're not congruent and begin releasing and requalifying those blockages. So to me, it is the deepest inner work there is. If you want to manifest anything, you have to do the work it takes to become a match for that. And so in that way, I think even though, yes, law of attraction teachings tend to be seen as like the entry point into real spiritual teaching. A lot of people look down on it as, kindergarten spirituality. Oh, come on, it's not just about you getting what you want. Grow up a little bit. At the same time, I think everything is serving its purpose, right? And the law of attraction is easily the biggest lead magnet for the world, for people in the world to be attracted to spirituality. The ego kind of needs a carrot on a stick sometimes, right? To say, hey, come over here, ego. Oh, you can have what you want over here. And then as it's approaching the carrot, it starts to realize, oh, to get the carrot, I've got to heal my traumas and, whatever else. And so it suddenly is willing to do these things that it wasn't previously willing to do. And so it does initiate the ego into spirituality, which can have its problems too, right? It can become a big fat spiritual ego, and I'm going to be the best manifestation teacher ever or something. But even that's serving a purpose, and it's getting that person to the next step they need. And I think eventually, if someone does succeed at manifestation, they'll attract all the things they want, and they'll come to that final conclusion that nothing in this material world can ultimately satisfy me because, again, it's not actually real. So it can't bring you lasting fulfillment. But the things that can bring you lasting fulfillment are already inside of you. They're the essences of those things you desire. The love, the connection, the peace, the purpose, the prosperity. It's all an essence within me. And I chase the forms in the world that I think reflect it. But eventually they show me, it was always in me to begin with. So I think the law of attraction as a spiritual teaching is actually a lot better than most people give it credit for. But yes, we do have to go beyond that need to have our material desires met and into the real spiritual teachings, which are what is it in you that is causing you to attract painful realities that cause you to suffer? It's your limiting beliefs, it's your traumas, it's your blocked emotions. And eventually, someone who's on the manifestation path is going to realize that, I think.
Yes, but then what about the very naughty people, very bad people, let's say, in the world? If the law of attraction works, if the mind creation works, then how can God prevent, you get my question, bad people from doing whatever they want in this world? Yeah, it's a big question.
It is, but it's a fun question because it allows us to unpack the whole concept of polarity. And I think this is kind of the premier confusion people have about the law of attraction is they'll learn all these principles and they're like, but if I have to be humble and kind and loving and generous to manifest things, how come all these evil people are so wealthy, you know? And the answer to the question is actually quite simple, which is that there are two polarities in consciousness which a person may choose. And either polarity, the creator is not going to blink an eye at. You can choose the light or the darkness, but there are different rule sets for how we attract things on each polarity. And so, one of the biggest mistakes that people who are on the positive polarity make, which is the path of light, love, truth, is that they'll try to use negative polarity principles to manifest the things they want because that's what they see mostly demonstrated in the world, right? And so the negative polarity is about separation from, power over, and coercion, control, manipulation. You'll notice that any wealthy billionaire, there's always corruption and collusion and stuff that's going on for them to acquire that kind of wealth because that's how you do it on the negative polarity. They're not generating that wealth by being of service to others and loving their neighbor as themselves, you know? That's the positive
Yes.
polarity. So it's like you have to know which polarity you want to be and then learn the rules of that polarity. And so when Jesus said these things like the measure you give is the measure you get back, he's speaking to those who are choosing what Jesus called the way of life, the kingdom of heaven. We got to play by our rules, the rules of our polarity, right?
Yes, and I know it's not an easy topic for me because when I ask questions about evil forces, dark forces in my own interviews on my YouTube channel, I often get the comment like, "Well, it's useless to talk about the evil and the dark things and etc.
Oh
because
yeah.
on the other side there is no right and wrong. You know, it's all the same. So don't even bother talking about the dark things here because it doesn't really exist. There is no, again, there is no right or wrong, and but I think that it's wrong because I think here you have, as you said, you have good and bad here in this world. You know.
Yeah. I see a lot of the same comments. It's a popular viewpoint in modern spiritual circles, I think, because to me it's kind of a trauma response to the amount of evil in the world. It's, hey, let's use a convenient non-duality principle to dismiss away this really ugly, scary thing I don't want to reconcile with.
Yeah.
And I get that. But I agree with you that no good is going to come from us not understanding the reality we live in. I think to say, oh, we shouldn't talk about what the negative polarity does or how it works or what their goals are, like that'd be like a basketball team saying, hey, look, we don't need to worry about that other team. It's about our team, okay? All that matters is us. And if we play strong, we're going to win. And if you give no concern or care to the opposition's strategy, they're going to outplay you. They're going to usurp you. And that's what we've seen happen on our planet is that these beings who've chosen the negative polarity, which, by the way, there's very few of them on our planet in comparison to those who are on the positive polarity. I think it's 95% or more positive on this planet, but the people that want positions of power are obviously going to be the most negatively polarized people on the planet because good people, people on the positive polarity, don't want to seek power over others. And so we have to become wise to this and say, look, although none of us want to have power over others, like we need to be able to fill these spots, these power gaps in our society, in government and big business and all these different positions. We need to put people of the light in these positions, at the very least, to prevent people from the darkness from occupying those positions. Because if we just secede all positions of power on this planet to the negative polarity, they're going to fill all those roles and dominate the planet the way that they have. More genocide, more corruption, more stealing our life force energy, on and on and on. And none of us want to live on a planet like that. So I see it a lot like shadow work. It's like we got to become self-responsible as a planetary civilization. And in the same way that, nobody on the spiritual path would say, oh yeah, you should totally ignore your shadows. Don't even think about your traumas and blockages, right? Just be the I am. Maybe some people think that, but I think most people would say, no, that's called spiritual bypassing. You have to look at your darkness if you're going to heal it. That's exactly what we have to do as a planetary civilization. So people who are saying, ignore the darkness, don't even talk about it. To me, I say that's planetary level spiritual bypassing. We can't afford to do that. Now, What we shouldn't do is hate it, judge it, be scared of it. Of course, we shouldn't make it real by fearing it and hating it and judging it. But we should be aware of what the negative polarity wants to do so that we can, as Jesus said, be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. Wisdom is also part of the positive polarity, not just love. We need love with wisdom in a balanced way to truly be of service to others.
I had a question when I was preparing this interview. What about you in your life? Basically, my question would be, do you still have challenges in your own life? Or is it like, I don't know, very easy for you right now?
I appreciate the question, but unfortunately for you and your audience, I actually am enlightened and don't suffer. So I can't help you with that one. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, I definitely suffer. I definitely have challenges. I don't want to be perceived as a guru or as an enlightened being. Like, I just want to be real and I want to be relatable more than anything. And so I do try to talk a lot about my own challenges and how I learn these things from my challenges so that people know, like, I'm no different than you. If I've uncovered these truths and have embodied them, you can too. And so I guess the short answer is I definitely still experience suffering, but I think the nature of our suffering evolves a lot as we evolve. Let me put it this way. I like to use the terms suffering downwards or suffering upwards. When we begin the spiritual path, we're just like suffering downwards, right? We're just spiraling. We don't know what to do. We're lost, confused, terrified, afraid. And we find these enlightenment teachings or whatever, and we try to strive towards the light. And eventually, at some point, a transition is made where we stop resisting our suffering and even just trying to not suffer. And we sort of accept, look, there's going to be suffering in some form in this life. I can't really escape that. I can only use my suffering for the highest good, right? If I'm going to suffer, I might as well learn how to suffer beneficially and learn the lessons that it's teaching me and suffer upwards, right? And I think to a large extent, like even ascended beings, even non-physical beings, in the astral planes, I think they probably still experience what we would call suffering in some regards. But I think the difference is that they are masters of suffering itself. I think that they suffer upwards in a tremendous way, such that whatever challenges they have, they're learning and extracting all the data from it. And that's all I think we can hope for in this life. But I say that with a caveat that suffering upwards is night and day better than suffering downwards. It's not like they're both the same, but might as well just suffer upwards. No, it's like when you start to suffer upwards, your life gains meaning, your challenges have purpose, and you actually feel a sense of fulfillment from your suffering, from the challenges you experience. It doesn't mean it's easy in the moment. It's always challenging. That's the point, right? Is the challenge brings out the wisdom and the gold in you. But it is that you start to feel more connected to yourself, to God, to your life purpose. And so you can more and more begin to have that, what Jesus called the peace that passes understanding. That peace, that kind of peace Jesus is describing, is suffering upwards to me. It means everything is happening ultimately for my highest good. That has to become a rock solid foundation of knowledge for you, right? I never suffer without a reason. There's always a reason I suffer, so I can learn that reason and I can transcend it. And when you have that bedrock to stand on, you actually find that you can face your challenges no problem and you can suffer through them without resisting them at all. And that's why I called the subtitle of the book A Sufferer's Guide to Freedom, because suffering is not just pain or challenge, but it's resistance to pain or challenge. It's not wanting to go through it that is the real suffering. It's the existential suffering. And when we do away with that resistance, suffering has a beautiful silver lining to it that causes us to stop resisting it and even sometimes look forward to it, knowing that every time I face a challenge, it transforms me and upgrades me into a better version of myself. And I think that's what we should all aim for in this life, not to stop suffering or avoid suffering.
Yes, and you also talk a lot about a very important goal in this life, the golden rule, loving other people as yourself. It's a very, very simple idea, but it's very hard to practice, obviously. If you can find a way to love your greatest enemy as yourself, it's a very important key, I think. But it's again, it's a very simple idea, this golden rule, but it's very important to practice in the daily life.
Yeah, that's the being in loving relationship to everything. Jesus actually said that the entire law of God, which to me is the universe, right? All the laws of the universe are summarized in this one commandment: love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And that speaks to the non-dual nature of Yeshua's gospel. There's many non-dual teachings that Yeshua gives. Famously, he rebukes his disciples for not seeing him in the poor beggar on the street and the widow and the orphan. He says, hey, when you didn't love the least of these, you didn't love me, which is clearly him implying that what I am is also in them. You know, the Christ nature is in them. So you better perceive it. You better see it that way. But he also said things like, if you make your eye single, your whole body will be full of light. Single meaning non-dual, not seeing duality. The Gospel of Thomas is just absolutely loaded with incredible non-duality sort of koans from Jesus, saying when you make the two one, only then do you enter the kingdom of heaven. So he was touching on this idea over and over, but the best of them all is love your neighbor as yourself, for this summarizes the entire law. Jesus said this is the greatest commandment of all. And so to me, it's just such a shame that Christianity doesn't predicate itself on that teaching that, hey, salvation is the golden rule. Salvation is love your neighbor as yourself. If you do this, you are in right standing with God, no question about it. Jesus told all these parables about God doesn't care about what you say or what you believe in your brain. God cares about the condition of your heart. And it's like every parable Jesus tells practically is speaking to this exact idea. God judges by the condition of your heart, not perfect blemishless behavior or something. Jesus is very clear. Hey, if you sin, if you make a mistake, just repent and God forgives you. But you can't be forgiven by God if you don't forgive your brothers, Jesus said. If you withhold love from your brother, your heavenly Father must withhold it from you. And that to me is just speaking to universal law. The universe is built on perfect balance. And so when I judge someone, when I make a problem in my mind, you're bad, you're dumb, you're evil, you're wrong, it's like I'm trying to imbalance the universe a little bit. And that's impossible. You can't imbalance the universe. And so instead, what happens is you have to wear the imbalance. You have to pay the consequences of that imbalance, which is that whatever you withhold from others has to be withheld from you because the universe can't be imbalanced. So Jesus was trying to liberate us from this trap of the soul of not realizing the, reflective nature of the universe. That look, as long as you're giving love to everyone, you are forgiven, you are loved, you are healed. But the second you withhold anything, your heavenly Father must withhold that from you. So therefore, love your neighbor as yourself is the royal way, the golden rule, as it's called.
Yes, and I think it's very logical because love your neighbor as yourself, this golden rule, it is oneness. It's because we are one. I
Yep.
have to love my neighbor as myself because I am this person too. But since I don't know who I really am, this doesn't make any sense. Like the me right now, I'm obviously
Right, right.
not you, but since I don't know who I am, I cannot get this idea from this 3D level. But again, it's the same idea. So as a conclusion, I would like to ask you, how could you describe your idea of God today?
Yeah, great question to end on. There's different ways I would define what God is to me. The one I try to focus on the most is love. I think that that's the most difficult definition of God for the mind to swallow and accept. And so it's probably the most powerful definition to live by. And it's the framework I use for God by far the most. But beyond that, because that's a bit open-ended and ambiguous, what is love? What does that mean? God is the relationship between all things. We can say that. I think we can also say God is the first person in the present tense, I am. And that speaks to what you just talked about of if I don't know who I am, if I'm mistaking myself for a body, then I can't love my neighbor as myself because I can't see them as myself. I can only see them as an other. And if you're an other in my mind, then I must keep you separate from me to a certain extent. I can't fully let you in. But when you let someone in, that's what we call love. Love is the recognition of a shared essence, a shared being. Because as we said, the body is not ultimately real. The body is born and it will die. Even your physical personality is changing day by day. So that's not even really what you are. And so that also means that that's not what they are. they're not really their body. They're not really their personality and expression. Those are like temporary expressions of what they are. But I think ACIM defines it best. In one of my favorite quotes from the course, it says, Christ's vision, the vision of Christ, has one law. It says, it does not look upon a body and mistake it for the Son whom God created. It sees no separation and not even the slightest fading of the light in anything it looks upon. So it's this idea that Christ vision, the Christ consciousness, if you prefer, is to, when you look at someone, are you identifying them as a body, a person in time and space? Well, the Christ in you doesn't do that. The Christ in you is immediately aware of the indwelling presence of God in that being. And therefore, you become incapable of judging, harming, or putting that person out of your heart because you're fully aware of the oneness, the shared being you have with them. And so that is what the spiritual path requires of all of us, is to go beyond the surface level perception of, body consciousness, if we want to call it that, and realize that the animating spirit in every form is the same presence everywhere. It's God, it's the Christ, it's the divine essence. And if you can always be aware of that divine essence, then you are in the kingdom of heaven. You are in the non-dual state where you're seeing no separation. So it's not easy to do, but obviously, Jesus gave us a really powerful roadmap for doing that, which is just begin by being of service to others. Take in the widow and the orphan, love the prisoner, all these things. Because when we go beyond ourselves to love and serve and bless others, it has the most powerful implications on our mind, on the ego. It literally forces the ego to start recognizing that shared oneness. And many famous Indian sages, Ramana Maharshi, Maharaji, Nisargadatta, have all said this, that, how do you go beyond the ego? Serve others, feed the poor. It's called karma yoga in India, but it's the underrated way of enlightenment. Through continual service to others, you can force the mind to accept the reality that you are not separate from others. Because every time you serve someone, you feel this incredible warmth and fulfillment and connection that is just indescribably satisfying in a way that nothing else is. And so I think we want to need to give ourselves that experience more and more if we want to truly awaken our consciousness to the reality of oneness.
Okay, it was a really, really good interview. I really love this kind of topics. So thank you for being my first guest for this kind of podcast.
Oh, I'm honored, man.
For people who want to know more about you, where can people find you, basically?
Yeah, it's pretty simple to find me. It's just my name on any platform. So youtube.com/Aaron Abke, Instagram, aaronabke.com. And then for all my programs and sort of teachings packaged into course formula, you can go to 4duniversity.com.
Okay, perfect. So thank you again. And I hope we will one day experience a better world, a better society, whatever. I don't know if we will get there, but let's have hope. And thank you again.
Thank you for having me, brother. Always a pleasure.